Bom dia a todos, a todas. É um enorme prazer estar com vocês todos aqui. Eu vou passar para o inglês para que o nosso colega possa melhor compreender o meu agradecimento. So we have today here Alex Dimitrief, who is the General Counsel for General Electric, which is perhaps a very difficult job since he handles issues in more than 180 countries. He has an enormous experience previous to General Electric. I will not go through this, but I would like to highlight at least two aspects. The first of these aspects is this interesting career where you have a private lawyer that goes to public services that give back to community some of his knowledge and then comes back to the private sector. So I think this possibility that in many countries is not common, I think it is an interesting aspect of your career. Perhaps if you could talk a little bit about that later, I would appreciate. Because these people here will have to make a lot of choices. And one of the interesting things is that the choices that you make, when they are bad, they are very bad. But when they are good, you dispute between other good choices, you can change. And that is one aspect that I would like to highlight or ask you to react a little bit about it. And obviously, I would like to ask you to explain a little bit what are the challenges of handling multitask, multinational lawyers around the globe. What does it mean? What is a new lawyer that enters this sphere where it's not just more a parochial job? You are really working on an international sphere. So this is my 2 points. I would like to thank, thank you very much for the privilege of coming, of taking your time. I know that you have a tight schedule in Brazil to talk with the students, but also thank you, my friend and colleague, José Jardim, who has been one of the pioneers on pro bono in Brazil, who really leading several lawyers in company to work and to provide public services. And also it's a very interesting person in revolving the question of gender in the law profession. So, Joseph, thank you for providing this opportunity for us to be here. So, Alex, the floor is yours, okay, and I will sit there so I can enjoy.
Thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here. So, my friend Tony West from Pepsi preceded me here as a guest speaker, and he told me that you have lots of questions and that you ask lots of questions, so I'm counting on that today, because I'd really like to speak and focus on what you would like to hear me talk about. But let me just talk about a couple things about the legal profession and talk about my career and talk about how we see it at GE, and hopefully that'll get the conversation going. I've done three things in the course of my career. I graduated from Harvard Law School in the mid-1980s, and my first job was I went and I worked in the government. And I was privileged to work in the Justice Department, and then I went over from the Justice Department and I worked in the White House for 1.5 years. And so the first part of my career was public service. And then the second part of my career, I went to a law firm called Kirkland Ellis, and I was there in the Chicago and New York offices for 20 years. I'll talk a little bit about how I ended up there and why I went there and what I think that did for me in my career. And then, much to my surprise, I ended up leaving my law firm practice after 20 years and going to GE. And I've had 4 jobs at GE. I came to GE as the global head of litigation and compliance in 2007. I had that job for 5 years. Then I became general counsel of our energy business, our power generation business, oil and gas, and the grid business. That was my first trip to Brazil with Josie back in 2011. I reorganized myself out of that job and became the general counsel of GE Capital, which was our financial services business. We exited that business 1.5 years ago. I reorganized myself out of that job. And then I became the general counsel of GE, and I've had that job for about 18 months. And I feel very privileged to have had 3 very different experiences. And there's some lessons I think that my career offers for you as you're thinking about the types of choices that you're going to make, both as a lawyer and also the future for you in Brazil. And I'll talk about all those for just a little bit. But before I do all that, I'd just like to congratulate you on having picked law as a profession. And I say that in all seriousness because for all the jokes that people tell in the United States and they tell in Brazil, and everybody complains about too many lawyers and how lawyers are bureaucracy and we add delay and we make things complicated, we never give an easy answer, we always have to do homework. People make fun of lawyers a lot. But you notice how whenever a country's in crisis, you know who they turn to? They turn to the lawyers. And that's because there's something special about our profession. There's an integrity that's involved in our work. People count on us to interpret the rule of law, to safeguard the laws in a country. There's an old joke. Everybody always cites Shakespeare. And remember, there's a line in Shakespeare where he says, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to kill all the lawyers. And everybody uses that as a joke about how much Shakespeare supposedly hated lawyers. But the truth is that the point of that story was that the people who wanted to upend society and create chaos were going to start by killing the lawyers because they're the ones who imposed order and rule of law and civility into society. So you've chosen a profession that after I've been doing it now for 32 years, I've never been prouder of in terms of the purpose that we have, in terms of the jobs that you have, in terms of the differences that you can make in your company, in your community, in your school, in your government, in your country. There's no one better than a lawyer to answer a higher purpose. And I hope you really think about that as you proceed in your career because it's something special about being a lawyer. You have an obligation to your clients, you have an obligation to your companies, but you have an obligation to other lawyers to do things honestly and do things with integrity and uphold a rule of law within a country that is a privilege. And as you become lawyers and as you advance in your careers, well, you realize how different this makes your job. And I think it's something very special and something that I hope you'll always cherish for the rest of your careers. So my first job was in government. And, I think it's important for people to serve their countries wherever they are throughout the world. And I think, again, you can do a job in government as a lawyer, but I wasn't a lawyer when I was in the government. I was at the Justice Department for 2 months, and then I went over and I actually worked on speeches for President Reagan. But I was involved in a variety of issues and a variety of very complicated subjects. And what I found was that even though I was young and even though I hadn't been trained very much, my skills as a lawyer worked very well in government, even on issues that weren't legal issues, because I had learned to think like a lawyer. I had learned to analyze both sides of an issue. I had learned how to force groups of people to look at both sides of the issue. And I had learned how to make sure that every person in the room felt included in the discussion and had their point of view expressed. So that when a decision was made, even when I was young, 27 years old, I was able to impose a sense of order in the discussions and in the evaluations that we did, which again, I think is something that's unique to lawyers and something that if you're interested in pursuing a career in government, is something that I think you should think about. And I think, again, your training as lawyers really helps as far as that goes. But I couldn't do that forever. I wanted to get on with my career. I was eager to become a trial lawyer in the United States. And so I stayed in government for a while, but then I decided to go be at Kirkland Ellis in Chicago. And so I was part of a big firm. It was 1,000 people, in 7 different offices. And I learned the hard way. I dived into cases. I did small cases, product liability cases against General Motors. I did a whole bunch of different cases. And I learned at a very early stage in my career that you can't be afraid of failing. And I think that's the one message I'd like to encourage you guys about today, which is you have to be willing to take chances. if you hear stories about lawyers and they come tell you that they were a great lawyer and they've never lost a case, my answer is that means that they've never tried a difficult case. I became a real lawyer the day that I got clobbered in a case, and I lost it. Because that's when I realized that, you know, the real lawyers are the ones who are not afraid to take chances, they're not the ones that are afraid to take on tough challenges, and they're willing to go ahead and take risk. And I've seen people over the course of my career play it safe at every single stage and not being willing to take chances, not being willing to take on the tough cases. And that's how you grow. That's how you develop as a professional, and that's how you really distinguish yourself. And that's how you learn lessons that make you a better lawyer. And I think that you have to be willing to take chances. I think you have to be willing to make mistakes. And I think the important thing is whether you learn from the mistakes that you make the right way. Because everybody makes them. Not everyone admits they make them, but everybody makes them. And I think what makes the difference between a really great lawyer and a mediocre lawyer is people who acknowledge that they've made mistakes and think about the right way to improve upon them and do them. But I did a whole bunch of different variety of cases, and just as a prelude to my next story, I think what I'd say is that I represented companies from Europe and companies from Asia who were sued in the United States. But what I did as a lawyer at my law firm was all American law. It was all American issues, companies being confronted and sued in United States courts. And I never really had a chance before I came to GE to work on legal issues outside of the United States. I was a very US-centric lawyer. I was really focused on American problems because that's what you hire American lawyers for, right? When you come to a firm like Kirkland Ellis and you deal with them. So I was focused on that, and I had what I'll look back on with fondness as a great career at Kirkland Ellis. I had a wide variety of clients. I did a whole bunch of different types of cases. I represented United Airlines in its bankruptcy. I represented investment bankers and all the conflicts and big scandals about research analysts in the United States and the financial services community. And everything was great. And then I get a call in 2007 about General Electric. And at that point, I'd been working hard, and I'd been at my law firm for 20 years. And I said, why not? If my family's on board, it's a great company, and it's involved in all these businesses, and it has a terrific reputation. Why not try something different? Why not take a change? So I took a chance. This goes back to my theme of taking chances and taking risks in your career. And I will say that it's lived up to all my expectations and plus some, because I knew that it was a great company. But here are the two things that have happened to me since I've been at GE that I didn't see coming, and that I think, again, are relevant for you guys as you think about the type of career you want to have. The first is that I never realized how much of a privilege it would be at a company that values integrity the way that GE does. When you work around the world in a bunch of challenging environments, and we'll talk about the environment in Brazil here in a second, it is a privilege to be part of a company with the men and women who are here with me today who value integrity. And being part of a company that is committed to doing things the right way and committed to making change in the right way is something that is hard to overstate the importance of. We as a company are working in emerging markets around the world. We're making a huge difference in sub-Saharan Africa. We now have a sustainable healthcare business that is working on new technologies to bring new types of healthcare devices to markets that otherwise couldn't afford them or wouldn't be able to use them. And being part of a company that does things like this has been a profound privilege in my career. The other thing, though, that's been incredible about being GE is its internationality. And, you know, as the dean said, we are now operating in 180 different countries. But I work with teams in 180 different countries. And what I didn't appreciate was how much of a privilege it was going to be able to work around the world with the very best talent in every country about their legal problems. not many American lawyers get an opportunity to work on Brazilian legal problems in Brazil with great Brazil lawyers, or Chinese legal problems in China with the best lawyers who are in China. And that has been a huge, unexpected bonus for me that, again, makes it hard for me to wait to go to work every morning because I'm very excited about it. Now, like, it makes for challenging days because I'll wake up in the morning and I'll do my China emails before breakfast, and then I deal with Europe through the morning, and then I, do North America and Latin America in the afternoon and night. But it's exciting, and it's really a privilege, again, to be in different markets. So the world gets smaller and it gets more challenging, but I think my other message to you would be that it also gets more local. And a company like GE has an international legal department. We have a law and policy team of 5,000 people throughout the world. I mean, think about that. That's bigger than most law firms. So over 1,000 lawyers, over 1,000 compliance professionals, 250 government affairs professionals, and the rest are involved in environmental health and safety. And the reason we have so many people is because we think it's important to have experts in each country where we do business, who understand the local laws, who understand the local regulations, who can represent us in local court systems in front of regulators, because GE has to be international and local at the same time. So we have to have the best talent possible in Brazil. We have to have the best possible talent in Venezuela, and that's not an American lawyer who's going to come and practice part-time in Brazil. It's going to be people who grow up in Brazil and who understand the Brazilian legal system and who are the very best talent that GE can find in Brazil, which is where you guys come in, because I'm hoping that at least some of you at some point will come work for us at GE or elsewhere in the world, depending on where your career paths take you. But again, I think that, at a company like GE, part of the secret to the success is I work for a boss who appreciates that Americans hardly ever always have the right answer, that the right answer is listening to your teams around the world, respecting the diversity of opinions, respecting the diversity of talents and culture that make up a company like GE, and that's our strength. And I think it's really listening to people, responding to people, and being a company that can be international but local in 180 countries all at the same time, which again is not easy to do, but something that again I think makes us unique and has made us a stronger company. One more thought just about careers. And then I'd love to open this up to questions and see where you guys would like to take this discussion, because as you can tell, I'll pretty much talk about anything. So a thought about careers and then a thought about Brazil. So a thought about careers. So I'm very proud of my career, and I'm very proud of having been general counsel at GE. But there's a little bit of a story to that. I'm actually a first-generation American. My mom and dad were Russian. They came to the United States in the early 1960s without speaking a word of English. I watched my mom and dad struggle with all of that. And may they rest in peace, my mom and dad were amazingly courageous people. Do you know what it's like to be in a country where your language isn't spoken and that's your home, and that's where you're going to be for the rest of your life? And they did it for me, so that I'd have opportunities in the United States, and I'll always be grateful for that. But my dad, God bless him, he was also very Eastern European, if you know what I mean. And he was a very strict, rigid, controlling man. And so we had a conversation one day when I was in college. And so remember, this is the late 1970s, before you guys were born. We didn't have laptops, we didn't have iPads, we didn't have the internet, there was no such thing back then. But there were computers, and they were just starting to appear. And my hobby was computers. And I wrote a computer game when I was in high school. And I actually still get royalties from it. It's only about $1.50 a year. I had a lousy lawyer who negotiated a really bad deal for me. But that was my passion. And so I'll never forget having a conversation with my dad one day where he says, "So, what are you going to do?" And I said, kind of like this computer thing, it's really interesting. Math is my natural strength. I'd really like to pursue that. And my dad says, that's not a real job. There's no money in computers. How are you going to support a family? How are you going to take care of you? You need to go get a real job. You argue all the time. Go be a lawyer. So I listened to my dad. Things have turned out okay, right? I can't complain. Like I said, I'm incredibly proud of my career. I'm proud of my team. I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish together. But every once in a while, I wonder if I could have been Sergey Brin and been like if I could have done Google. Could I have done Microsoft? And I think and I think the passion there, or, the question there is, I didn't follow my passion. And that's my advice to you, that as you start out your career, follow your passion. Do what excites you, what motivates you, what really interests you. Like I said, I'm very proud of my career, but there's always that little bit of me that wonders, what would happen if I followed my passion? And it would be interesting to know. And I always try to tell people, using my story as an example, that you'll be okay if you follow your passion. Don't do what you think people think you ought to do, or don't do what you're not passionate about because people will think you're successful about it, or don't do something that might pay a little bit more than another job if that's not what you want to do. Follow your passion. That would be my main advice. And if you do that, you'll be okay. That's how you truly have a great career. That's how you really find, a rewarding career. So then a thought about Brazil, because, the world's kind of a crazy place right now. I come from the United States, where it's about as crazy as it could possibly be. Right now, an election result that nobody predicted. On the night of our election in the United States, I predicted that Hillary Clinton was going to get 340 electoral college votes, so you can see how good I was at that. And so it's crazy in the United States, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have about that. But I think about what's happening in Brazil, and I just want to tell you guys that GE believes in Brazil right now more than we ever have. And that doesn't sound like it makes sense, but hear me out. First of all, the real tragedy of Operation Car Wash and the real tragedy of the investigations is what it's meant for companies like Odebrecht, which was a world-class, unbelievable company that to this day is known for outstanding work. One of the best in the business, high quality, delivered on time, delivered the way that it was supposed to be, dependable, one of the best partners that any consortium could look for in engineering, procurement, contract work, construction work. Amazing company. And they lost their way. And it's a shame, because a lot of people's careers have been adversely affected. There are people who are paying the price for what's come out and the scandal that was uncovered. Most importantly, the senior leaders of the company who are paying the price personally. But think about what it's done to the company. I mean, that's ultimately the cost of losing your way and losing integrity. That's why we try. We're not perfect. We make our share of mistakes, but that's why we try to do business with integrity, because ultimately that's the only thing that's fair to your employees and your customers and the families and communities that count on you to do things the right way. That's the real lesson of Operation Car Wash, is the human cost that it entails when something goes on like that. But why would we believe in Brazil now more than ever? Well, it's because the rule of law is winning. And what happens is that when people are courageous enough to raise their hands and protest corruption, no matter who's involved, and no matter which party, no matter what office they hold, it shows that there has been a change in a society that says we are not going to tolerate this anymore. And as much as it may have been just the way things have been done, no more. And if it means that a president comes down, a president comes down. And if it means another president comes down, it means another president comes down, because we believe in the rule of law. And I come back to where I started with, guess who's going to decide this for Brazil? The lawyers. And in the end, that's an enormous source of strength. And so when a company like GE says, where are we going to invest? Where do we believe? Where do we think we'll be treated fairly? Where do we think our employees will be treated fairly? Where do we think our customers are going to survive the best? You come to a company or a country like Brazil that has embraced the rule of law. So I wrote a note before I made the visit to our senior management team when the first stories came out about Odebrecht. And I said, don't give up on Brazil. Believe in Brazil now more than ever. And you know what? Our whole senior management team agrees with me. Because again, it's a sign that people are committed to change. And you're at the forefront in Brazil on that, in Latin America. And you are becoming lawyers at an unbelievable time to be able to make a difference in your country. And I hope you embrace that opportunity. It's a unique, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a difference. So with that, what would you guys like to talk about? My team's been asking me all questions by the week, so they don't get to ask anymore.
Nobody knew about his game, guys. It's news to us.
And the Reagan speeches.
I told, just let me kick it off. I
Sure.
told, when I came here last week, that you shared with us an article about 10 things that I wish I had known before when I moved from a law firm to an in-house counsel, to an in-house position. Can you share some of that with the folks? Because some of the tips were pretty interesting.
Well, so again, I think that when you're making the biggest change from being at a law firm to going to a business is that you go from an environment where it's all about the lawyers and all about making sure the lawyers are happy, to where it's definitely not all about the lawyers. So you go from being the revenue generator at a firm, and you go from, being the center of attention to becoming an enabling function at a company. And that's why you have to choose a company that you pick pretty carefully, because you want to go to a place that values lawyers and values input. Not all companies do. So you have to pick your spots, but you want to go to a company that understands the importance of doing things the right way and the role that lawyers can play in it. And I think you also, really need to understand the importance of how to communicate within a company more effectively than at a law firm. Because again, I think that at a law firm, people recognize your expertise. They hire a law firm when they get in trouble. They hire a law firm when they have a particular need. And with an in-house lawyer, a lot of times when you're at a company, it's up to you to raise the issue, and it's up to you to be the one that flags the problem. And so you have to be a little bit more courageous, I think, than at a law firm, and know how to raise issues the right way and be prepared to discuss them and do those. And then, I guess the other thing is that when you're at a company, you're there for good. So you have to convey advice in a way that earns you credibility with the rest of the team, so that when there's a problem again, they invite you back into the room and seek your advice again. And at a law firm, you can give advice to a company, you handle a deal, you handle a case, you handle a matter, and you just go on to the next client, and it's not that important. But when you're at a company, you're there for good. And you have to develop relationships in a way that has people bringing you back into the room. And there's a skill to that, and there's a talent to that, to being part of the management team. Oh, come on, guys. Tony told me you had a lot of questions. Yeah. Was Harvard? So I'll tell you the most amazing thing about Harvard was the students I was with. So in that respect, it was important because I made relationships there that stayed with me the rest of my life. So I don't think it was Harvard as opposed to some other school that made it really important. I think, I was fortunate to go there, and Harvard opens up opportunities for whoever goes to Harvard, and so that part of it's great. But there's nothing magic about Harvard as opposed to this law school or another law school. It's really about the relationships that you develop with your classmates. And I think that, you guys should embrace that opportunity. You should hear each other's ideas. You should learn how to respect everybody expressing their opinions. And then you guys have developed a network here that should stay with you your entire life as you go on through your school, through your career. So when I look back on school, that's what I remember the most. I remember my classmates, and I've kept in touch with them. Now, fortunately, at a school like Harvard, they're around the world, so pretty much anywhere I go, I can find somebody. But I think that's what I remember at law school most, is just the unique experience to exchange ideas in the way we did and the respect we developed for each other. And the particular place I went wasn't as important as the fact that I went to a great law school like this one.
Here. Good afternoon.
Hi.
My question for you today is, which are the most paramount skills that you think that a lawyer should have in the modern days?
Okay, I think that's a great question. So to me, it really comes down to two things. First of all, I think writing is underappreciated. Being a good writer is so important. Being able to express yourself clearly, honestly, persuasively, it makes a huge difference. And it makes a huge difference if you're going to be a litigator and handle disputes where you write briefs and submissions and submit filings to courts. If you're going to be involved in regulatory law and you make submissions to legislatures and regulators and the executive branch. It also makes a difference if you're going to be in the business world and you're going to be writing agreements. Being able to write well, being able to express yourself well is so important. And I'll be honest with you, as a client, it's one of the first things I look at is whether when people are communicating with me, even in emails, whether they write well and how well they write. Are they concise? Do they get to the point? Is it persuasive? Is it honest? So I'd say that ability to communicate with the written word is a dying art. There's something about emails that make people be less disciplined about how they write. I don't know what it is, but it's something that I'm worried about, and I really encourage people to focus on that. Then the second one is being honest and being ethical. To me, I can tell when a lawyer is telling me what I want to hear as opposed to what I need to hear. And I think that the ability to be honest and convey difficult advice even when it needs to be conveyed is a huge strength for a lawyer. And it takes time, it takes practice. You will have rough spots along the way. You will have people who don't react well when you give them unpleasant or difficult advice that they don't want to hear, but they'll be grateful to you that you did. And learning how to do that and learning how to deliver judgment in a compassionate, thoughtful, balanced way is something that I think helps determine whether a lawyer is going to be successful or not.
Thank you for the great lecture. Other than G, how would you say that the general corporate world sees Brazil at this point in time? I don't know if you have a question for that, but I would like to hear your thoughts.
No, so I think it's a great question, right? And I'll be very honest with you. I think that the world's reaction is mixed. So I think there are companies, first, I think Brazil has always been seen as an incredibly desirable market by every company in almost every industry, which is why you see virtually every multinational company in Europe and the United States having significant operations in Brazil. But I think there are probably some companies who are going to be scared off a little bit by what they're seeing right now with Operation Car Wash, and they're going to say, this is a tough market. I think we'll stay away for a little bit because we don't want to get caught up in all that, and we don't want our reputation caught up in all that, and we don't want to risk being caught up in an investigation and worrying about all of that. So there are some companies that are probably going to retreat and pull back a little bit. And then there's companies like us who view it as an opportunity, and not. It's like I wouldn't ever wish it on anyone. But, I look at it and I say that being a company that tries to do things the right way, I think this is the kind of a market that we've been preparing for in terms of being ready to step up and help people that want to try to do business the right way. And so I think it's going to be a mixed reaction. But in terms of the long-term future in Brazil, it's hard not to believe in Brazil. You look at the environment, you look at the resources, you look at the infrastructure, you look at the talent, you look at the education system, you look at the determination of people to continue to improve the education system. It's hard not to be excited about the future in Brazil. And I can tell you, GE's here for the long term.
And do you currently keep in touch with your Brazilian team?
Of course. So I probably keep in touch with my Brazilian team a little bit more than they'd like me to. But no, of course. So so the way that we're structured at GE is that we have. I'd say it's it's a matrix. It's not easy. I think learning to succeed within GE takes a little bit of stamina too. But we're organized by business, and each business has international operations, including operations in Latin America and Brazil. We're also organized by region, where Josie has a team of lawyers who are regional lawyers who are responsible for all of our businesses in Brazil. And like I said, each business has its own general counsel here in Brazil or Latin America. And then we also have corporate teams that are responsible for what happens in Brazil. So by virtue of those overlapping responsibilities, the team in Brazil talks with the business teams and the corporate team all of the time, and vice versa. So there's regular communication. And the blessing of a technology like telepresence, and if you guys haven't used it yet, just wait. It's amazing because you sit in a room and you dial up a picture on a screen and it's like you're sitting in the room opposite from somebody. As a matter of fact, the other day, Josie was waiting to do a meeting with me, and I kind of snuck into a telepresence room and called somebody back in Fairfield. And it was like we were having a conversation next door to each other, in Boston, next door to each other. And it was an amazing technology. So I think when you look at that, the ability for people in Brazil to communicate real time with headquarters and vice versa is so simple today. It doesn't require travel. But there's worse places for an American to come than Rio or Sao Paulo.
Thanks.
Hi. I'd like to know if FGV is a well-known institution in the international market.
It's known as an incredibly promising institution in Brazil, and I think that when you look at the high percentage of people who practice and who go on to law firms from here, I think it's viewed as an incubator of tremendous talent within Brazil. So yes.
Thank you.
Hi. If you could, what advice would you give to yourself in your 20s, when you were 20s?
Other than stick with computers?
Yes. Yes.
I think that the main advice that I would give myself is be a little less cautious. So I'm not saying that, and part of what you're hearing from me are lessons that I've learned over the years. So I was always scared to lose my first case. And it's not pleasant, by the way. I can't say that it's fun to lose a case. But I was just inordinately worried about losing my first case. And as a result, I drove myself crazy. I probably drove my family crazy. I was a nervous wreck when I had this case. And you know, the funny thing was the world was still turning the day after I lost my case, and I had clients who called me, and I actually had new clients who called me who were impressed that I had the courage to see that case all the way through, even though I lost. And all of a sudden I realized, you know, it's going to be okay. It's not only going to be okay, it's going to be better. And so when I look back on that, there were 5 or 6 years when I was a younger lawyer when I lived in fear of a bad result, because I said, what's that going to say about me? How's that going to affect my career? So rather than enjoying the moment and getting involved in my cases, not being quite as worried about whether I won or lost, but whether I did a good job, you know, I wasted a lot of time and energy, and I created a lot of anxiety for myself that wasn't necessary. You know, so I think, again, what I can say to you is that a person like me who's been doing this for 30 years, I look for young women and men who are ready to take chances. I look for young women and men who aren't scared, you know, who are brave, who are willing to take on a tough deal. I mean, the women who are here sitting in the front row who work for me, they've risen to general counsel jobs in GE because they're tough. You know, they're not scared to negotiate a tough deal. They're not scared to go in and, you know, go toe-to-toe with a tough customer, with a tough government official, you know, and that's because they're willing to take chances. And that, in the end, is really what you have to be doing. And if you're scared of failing, if you're scared of a mistake, if you're scared of having a temporary setback, you're only going to accomplish a fraction of what you'd be able to do if you believe in yourself.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know where that's from. My kids got me a new watch, and I have absolutely no idea how to use it yet.
Hi, sorry. I have a question about governance and enforcement. Because after the car wash operation, I have seen like a major movement in Brazil of companies trying to enforce governance. We see new laws, anti-corruption law, and all of these. And I see you talking about GE and how proud you are about its integrity. And this is like relief for me to hear, because I had a lot of friends who worked at Odebrecht, and they were all so proud of it and they loved it. It was really a dream for. I'm from Bahia, and Odebrecht is from Bahia, and it was a dream for everyone to work at Odebrecht and be there and be part of the team.
A great company, right?
Yes, and nobody saw what was going to happen. And then I wonder how GE, that is so big, that it has presence in so many places, make sure that it follows its integrities with different cultures. How you enforce this?
So I think that's a great question, and I'll tell you. First of all, we try our best, and I just want to emphasize to you guys, I'm not here today to say that GE is perfect. We have made our share of mistakes. We have had employees who've paid bribes. We've had employees who have violated the law. We have had employees who have lied on accounting issues and otherwise. So we've had our share of mistakes. The difference, I think, is that we acknowledge those mistakes, we own up to those mistakes, we disclose those mistakes on our own to government officials when it's required, and we punish people within our company when they intentionally violate our rules, and we teach our mistakes so that people won't make the same mistakes again. And we recently acquired Alstom, which had a series of very serious corruption issues before they became part of GE. And these are unbelievable women and men who are incredibly talented, who are part of a great company, who, again, didn't see it coming, didn't know that it was going on, and were surprised by it. And what they say to me that surprises them about GE is how openly we discuss these issues. We don't pretend it doesn't happen. We don't pretend, look, we're 300,000 employees in 180 countries around the world. I can tell you right now, as I'm talking to you right now, there are 10 people in our company that are doing something that would make the rest of my hair fall out if I knew they were doing it. And, the trick is, are you honest about it? Do you acknowledge that you have mistakes, and do you talk about them? And I think that the surprise that people have expressed to me from Alstom as they've come over to GE is how openly we discuss our issues and how we acknowledge that we've made mistakes and how we openly discuss what we're doing to fix them. The reason we're able to do it is because I am not the senior executive at GE who owns integrity. My boss, the CEO, Jeff Immelt, owns integrity. He makes it very clear that he expects people to do business the right way, and it's really about culture. And you know what I always say, and again, you guys will see this as you go on in your careers, what I always say is that when I get up at a leadership meeting, when I get up at a town hall and I talk about the importance of integrity, people listen, they're polite. But, you know, there's part of them that says, well, sure, he's the general counsel, what else is he going to say? But when my boss gets up, or when Rafael Santana, the CEO of Latin America, gets up, and he talks to the teams about his expectation that people are going to do business the right way, that we're going to meet our targets the right way, and believe me, we have tough targets. We demand a lot of our people. But we expect people to do business the right way, and if you violate our rules, you're out. That's when you can hear a pin drop in the room because it's that quiet. So to me, the secret to GE is that we have made integrity something that the business leaders own, not the general counsel or the compliance team. It's not something that they have the option to delegate to the lawyers for the lawyers to get it right. Our job is to enable our business leaders to lead the company the right way, but ultimately they're responsible for it, and they're the ones who make it happen, and I really credit them for the character that GE has. I think that's our secret. I'm just getting warmed up, guys, so you got to keep going.
Well, hi.
Hi.
I would like to know, how does General Electric sees our law system and the bureaucracy in Brazil? Are we far behind our competitors? And how? What point are we?
So whenever you feel bad about delays in the court system or bureaucracy, just remember that the average length of a case in India is about 24 to 25 years. But in all seriousness, you know, I think there are aspects of the judicial system in Brazil that frustrate Americans and other multinationals that come in because it can be slow. It can be frustrating. The one area in particular that drives Americans like me crazy are the labor and employment courts, where the statistics are phenomenal, right? 3% of the world's workers and 97% of the world's employment litigation, or something like that. And so the good news, again, is there are reforms in place. I promise not to tease the team about this anymore either, so I'm sorry. But the good news is there are labor reforms that are in place to try to reform the system in a way that I think would bring the Brazilian labor and employment environment more in line with that around the rest of the world. But there's progress to be made. But the encouraging point is that there's progress to be made. And as I look at the results that we've had in courts in Brazil and a couple particularly significant cases that I've been involved in over the last 10 years, it took a while to get to the right place. And sometimes it was frustrating that it took a little bit longer than it ought to have taken to get to the right place, but we got to the right place. And the reforms are promising. I think people are encouraged by them. And again, I think that when you emerge from the current crisis, my guess is that the government's going to operate better than it has before. And my guess is that the judicial system is probably going to feel a little bit more emboldened to take some steps and make progress a little faster than it has before. Just an educated guess, but that's ordinarily what happens. When you hit a rough spot like this, you emerge from it stronger than ever. So again, I think people are encouraged.
Nobody's going to ask about Trump. Come on, guys. The president tweets.
Hello, thanks for the amazing lecture.
Thanks.
I'd like to ask you, what are the perks of being a private lawyer and then doing this transition to the public sphere?
Perks of being a lawyer. You know, I guess to me the main benefit of being in the private sector at a law firm is you have more control in most law firms over what you do and the type of work that you're going to do, and you have a choice about, you know, where you want to specialize and what kind of work you want to try to go to. And that's not true in every single law firm, and I think some law firms are probably better than others in terms of adapting the work and allowing you to focus on areas you'd like to. And you could say the same thing in government, but, you know, government kind of is what it is. I mean, the work's there and it's got to be done, and it's not as though you can be selective. It's more you get the job and you get whatever it takes comes with the job, and you have to get it done. And so I just find it a little bit less flexible. I think that the downside of being a private lawyer is clients. You know, and I have to say, you know, that as much as I loved being at Kirkland Ellis because it was a great law firm and I had great experience, and I had a lot of clients I liked, I had a lot of clients I didn't like very much. You know, and you quickly learn that there are some clients who give you assignments on Friday afternoon only because they didn't get around to figuring out what they needed until Friday afternoon. There are clients who expect you to leave your family on a Sunday and come travel to a meeting on Monday because that's convenient to them, and they don't really care whether they're ruining your weekend. There are clients that give you false deadlines on briefs or documents when they don't really need them. And being in the professional services business can be really frustrating because of that. And so here's another piece of gratuitous advice, and you'll think I'm crazy for saying this, but, you know, fire a client every once in a while. I did it when I was at my law firm, and I'll tell you, there's no more liberating feeling. I will never, and you know, look, I'm realistic. I was at an advanced stage in my career where I had enough business that I didn't have to worry about it. So I'm not telling you to commit career suicide. But, you know, I was at a stage in my career, and I will never forget how great it was to be able to tell this client, well, you know, you're going to need to go someplace else because I've decided I'm not going to work with you anymore. And they were just, what do you mean you're not going to work with me anymore? And I said, you know, I'm sorry, but you have made my life unnecessarily difficult over the last 2 years, and I think it'd be better for you to go find someone else who's more suited to your needs. And, you know, it was like the greatest 15 minutes of my life. And I never, ever missed that client again. And I also got a lot of respect within my law firm for having done it because they all knew what kind of client this was. But, you know, you have to have a little bit of a track record before you can do that.
I'd like to know what was the reaction at GE after the Trump election, and how does GE as a company feels about the Trump administration?
I think that's a great question. So I think it would be honest for me to say that I and everyone else were astonished that he won. I don't think anybody saw it coming. There was one senior executive at GE who predicted that he was going to win. That was it. And the rest of us were shocked that he was able to win. And how do we feel about it? We're anxious about it, I think is the honest answer. There are some things that President Trump is doing in terms of regulatory reform and in terms of tax reform and some business initiatives that he's undertaking that would benefit GE and would benefit other companies. And in that respect, having a more pro-business administration in the United States is a good thing in some respects, and, you know, corrects probably some of the excesses that we've seen in the United States towards very heavy regulation of businesses, you know, like a hostility towards business at the Justice Department on merger clearances and things like that. So in that respect, the Trump administration holds out some promise for business for some promising things. But the problem is is that it's a package deal. And there are things that President Trump stands for, and there are things that President Trump advocates that are inconsistent with GE's values and beliefs. And we are not going to retreat from those values and beliefs. And I think the two instances that really come to mind are climate change, where we believe that the science behind climate change is real. I mean, to the point where it can't be refuted by anybody who's a serious scientist at this point. And you know, you don't have to get caught up in this debate about whether man caused it. But the fact is that the activities that human beings engage around the world contribute to it, and it's hard to deny that. And so the question is, do you take responsible steps to reduce carbon emissions or not? And we think that's a debate that requires intelligent people around the world to cooperate. And things like the Paris Treaty that represent an international commitment to address this issue together for the benefit of people in all of our countries are things that GE continues to believe in, and we're going to continue to believe in that regardless of what the Trump administration says. So that's one, and that's an area where we think that regardless of what the Trump administration does or the American administration does, the rest of the world is going to continue to support low carbon plans on their own, and we're going to be right there with them and supporting them with our renewables business and otherwise. And then the other one that's probably an emotional topic, and particularly emotional for me as a first generation American, are what we're saying about diversity, inclusion, immigration, and whether our employees from around the world are welcome to visit our headquarters as visitors to the United States and working in the United States. The United States is a nation of immigrants. Our principles have always been to welcome people from around the world into our country to make it a stronger place. And the United States is a stronger company because of people like my parents. And so I find personally, speaking on behalf of me and not GE, I find things like the immigration order offensive. And the great thing about the United States is we're at liberty to say that if we want to, without getting into trouble. And so my boss posted a blog the day after President Trump issued his immigration order saying that we're standing by our international teams. We're not retreating from our commitment to diversity around the world. We're standing by our customers. We're standing by the countries where we do business, and nothing about the Trump administration is ever going to change that. And that's our policy. That's where we are. We don't like it that that's become a topic of conversation. But I'll tell you that when I go around the world, everybody's anxious about it, everybody wants to know about it, and I'm very quick to say that we are not changing our internationality one bit. The nice thing about being from a company like GE, we've been around 125 years. We've made it through a lot of presidents. We'll get through this one too. And you know what? We're going to be around a lot longer than Donald Trump is. And we're going to continue to do what we think is the right thing. And in the end, that's strength for us, and that's a huge source of strength for us. I think that the challenge for me as the head of government affairs at GE is, what do you do when you have a president who tweets things at 4 o'clock every morning about companies, and what are we going to do if he criticizes us for locating a facility in Brazil or Africa or Saudi Arabia instead of the United States? And for me, and I don't mean to get too into the weeds here, but there's a huge distinction between two types of activity. There's offshoring, and when I say offshoring, what I'm talking about is locating something outside of the United States for one reason, and that's to get lower costs, even if you're selling back in the United States. And then there's localizing, which is what we do, which is locating teams, supply chain, and manufacturing operations in countries outside of the United States so that we can be better businesses in those countries and sell into those countries. That's our plan. People are crazy if they think that's not in the best interest of the United States. In the last 5 years, we've sold 80% of our jet engines that we've made inside of the United States to companies outside of the United States. We sold 90% of our turbines in our energy business outside of the United States. Those support jobs in the United States. So the investments we've made in the countries where we sell that equipment have paid off handsomely for GE. And so when GE wins outside of the United States wins too. And that our job is to articulate that distinction and defend ourselves against the tweets. And I think we'll be able to do it because I think we're right. And we have a success record that's on our side. But you know, there will be tense moments from time to time, I expect. And you have my counterparts in the United States, Tony West and everybody else. We have emergency plans now for when we get the tweet. You know, and that's not something I saw coming 2 years ago. You know, it's a new way of doing business.
It's me over here. I'm not a student, I'm a professor here. And I'd like to go back to the question of passion.
Sure.
I don't know if you know, but law is an undergraduate course in Brazil. So our students are, on average, 18 years old when they start studying law.
Yep.
So I think it's fair to assume that many of them are in the exact same situation you were. They're studying law because their parents told them they have to get a real job, right? And so I'm a bit afraid that they might not show up for class tomorrow.
Well, so
but you do sound very passionate about your career as a lawyer. So I'm thinking, well, I guess very few children would say that they would like to be a corporate lawyer when they grow up, right? But I think that law is maybe more of an acquired taste. How do you learn to love law? How much time should you give this relationship, you know, before you decide you have to go back to whatever it was that you originally wanted to do?
So I think that's a really fair question. And, you know, so what I'm not trying to encourage you guys to do is just bail on the studies, wing it in class, and just, follow the passion that you happen to have today. Continue the investment in your law degree and make sure you do a good job in school. I think, the one thing I'd say is that even if you aren't going to go practice at a law firm, or even if you're not going to go practice law as such, law is a great training. And some of my best friends from my law school class never practiced, law the way I did a single day in their life. But again, that skill I told you guys about being able to evaluate problems and make sure that other people evaluate them the right way, that comes in handy in a variety of professions. It comes in handy in the business world. It comes in handy in government. It comes in handy. So some of the best lawyers I know have never practiced a day of law in their life because of what they learned in law school. So don't get the wrong idea when I say that you need to follow your passion. In terms of a career in law, I became convinced that I had done the right thing about 2 to 3 years in. And one of the reasons is because I got involved in a pro bono project that involved helping children who were being held in temporary juvenile detention facilities in Chicago, awaiting trial for crimes, alleged crimes, who were there for endless periods of waiting times in inhuman living conditions. And my law firm allowed me to volunteer for that work. I spent hundreds of hours on this case, and I was able to get a district court judge to order that the facility be cleaned up, that the quality of meals be upgraded, just as a question of basic human decency. And I realized at a relatively young age in my career that if it hadn't been for my law firm willing to make this investment in applying the rule of law to these poor kids who didn't have anyone to help them, they'd probably still be in there. And so realizing that there is, again, a broader purpose that lawyers can serve really made me proud to be a lawyer at a young age. And I look back at what we do and the ability that lawyers have to help promote reasonable thinking and rule of law in a variety of contexts. And that's how I get passionate about being a lawyer. One of the things that I'm seeing around the world is the tradition of pro bono taking hold around the world. And I will say that this is one area where the United States has been ahead. And believe me, and again, I'm going to say same thing I did about GE. I'm not here to say the American legal system is perfect. I'm not here to say that American lawyers are perfect. There are a lot of American lawyers who embarrass me to death when I watch how they behave. So don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of really good people with big hearts who really care about their communities and give back to their communities. And I'm encouraged that companies like GE are helping law firms have traditions of pro bono and giving back to communities take hold in Brazil, Europe, and other countries where it hasn't been as much of a part of the fabric of the legal profession. So that's a change you guys can help make too. Because I do think that the law firms you go to and the companies you can go to can find ways to give back. I know you guys have been involved in programs like that already. And I think that, you know, by working with companies like GE that have a commitment to community service and getting back, you can become passionate. And you can, again, be proud of being a lawyer. So for all my joking about wondering what would have happened to me if I'd been in computer science, the difference I've been able to make because of the teams I've been on, the people I've worked with, the companies that have given me the resources to do it, I couldn't be prouder of some of the things that my teams working with me have accomplished over the years. And this is one of the areas that really makes me proud to be a lawyer. So there's a lot of good work to be done in the world by lawyers, and I hope you embrace that opportunity.
Hello.
Hi.
Here in Brazil, it's clear that our troubled times in politics, mainly, if there's one thing, good thing about it, is that people are now talking about law, talking about politics in general, and United States is not exactly in the best political moment as well. I'd like to know if that's happening to there, if people are starting to talk about more than they used to.
Well, so I'd answer that question in two ways. I mean, for the first part, I think there are people who are being motivated to participate in the political process now who never have before. So our voting rates in the United States and our voting turnout rates are embarrassing. You know, we typically, for a presidential election, have fewer than 30% of eligible voters vote. And I don't think that's going to happen next time. I think there are a lot of people who are unhappy with the result, and I think that they realize that rather than just complain about it, they ought to go do something about it. So I think you're seeing more involvement, and I think there's people who are going to get involved, and I do think that President Trump has activated a whole segment of the population in the United States who are going to be more involved going forward, just like President Obama did. So I think, you know, you are seeing greater participation. In terms of talking about things, you know, I will say that the one strength of the United States compared to a lot of other societies and a lot of other governments is we actually never stop talking about everything. And that could be a weakness, but one of the strengths is there is a tradition of challenging authority in the United States. So that's why you don't see anyone hesitating to criticize President Trump very dramatically. You don't see a company like GE hesitating to criticize President Trump when we think it's important. That's part of our culture. And you don't see anybody hesitating to challenge leaders of companies. You don't see anybody challenging to ask hesitating to ask hard questions. And again, people look at the United States and they look at everybody yelling at each other all the time on Fox News and everywhere else, and they think we're a mess. But I actually view the openness that people have to debate and openness to challenge as a strength of the United States. So we're ahead of most of the rest of the world in terms of our leaders and our powers of institution being subject to review and challenge. And again, I think that's a source of strength for the United States.
Sorry. I noticed that your Brazilian team there's a lot of women in it, and it got my attention. I was wondering if GE is engaged with gender equality in the corporate world. If you talk about if it's something that it's on the mind of the company.
All the time. So we actually have so yesterday we had our team meeting, and all the general counsel who reported at the meeting were women except for 2 guys. And sorry to repeat the joke, but the 2 guys did okay yesterday. But I'm proud of the fact that we have a very diverse team throughout the world. And I think that we talk about diversity and inclusion constantly at GE. I'll admit that right now we have a US-centric view on it. And so, we have issues with participation and promotions of African Americans in the United States, with people of Hispanic backgrounds. There's an enormous debate which has really changed dramatically about gay and lesbian people in the United States and their ability to have equal opportunities at companies like GE. And we're in the forefront of all that. And, and while we're saying that, we shouldn't overlook that gender diversity continues to be a challenge, both in terms of entry into the company, but also promotions within the company. So we recently announced an initiative of 20,000 by 2020, which is we are determined to grow our workforce to have 20,000 females in engineering and science-related jobs in the United States by the year 2020. And we're going to look at that both in terms of the schools where we're hiring from, and also the types of jobs that we're placing women who are entering into GE in, and the type of promotion and retention and training programs we have. But that's an ambitious target, because right now our number is about 13,500. So we're talking about growing by 30% within the next 2 to 3 years, and it continues to be a huge issue for us. I think that the challenge for GE on this issue, and I'm very passionate about diversity and inclusion, particularly inclusion, because I've seen over the years how much stronger a team can get if everyone really feels like they have a fair chance to participate. And the only thing that matters is how good they are, not what color their skin is, not what sex they are, not what their mom and dad did, not where they went to school, but how good they are. So I'm convinced it's going to happen, and it's going to continue to happen around the world. The issue for a company like the United States is diversity means different things in different cultures and different places of the world. And we have to be careful about not bringing our U.S. focus to this, because what I've seen happen sometimes when I speak about diversity outside of the United States and elsewhere is that people kind of tune out because we're not speaking to the issues that really resonate with people. Gender diversity, unfortunately, remains an issue in most parts of the world. So that's always a timely and pertinent topic to discuss. But in Europe right now, for example, the big issue is religious tolerance and ethnic tolerance. And how do you address that? And how do you address the challenges that Muslims are feeling as they try to enter the workforce and as refugees try to enter the workforce in Europe, which is undergoing one of the greatest humanitarian crises that we've witnessed in the last 20 years right now. And that's going to raise all sorts of issues that are going to tear at the social fabric in Europe in the next 5 to 6 years. And I think companies have to think about how they're going to handle the challenges of diversity and inclusion in an environment like that. So I think there's a huge role to play, but believe me, we're focused on that. And I view it as a sign of strength when I go around the world and I see GE teams that look like the communities that we're working in. And to me, that means that you're doing something right. And I think that it's the right thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do. Hi.
Hey, my question is about how is to be in a company that has its economics interests and also has worries about social impacts and environment impacts, and what is the paper of the lawyer in this conflict?
So, I actually, I know that all the business schools and a lot of academic studies say that there's a conflict between the economic interest of a company and the social responsibilities of a company. I think that line has been increasingly blurred over the years. And I think that one of the reasons that we've been successful outside of the United States is because we've invested outside of the United States. and that I think that governments and employees and communities expect that a company that is going to sell into a country and profit from that country has an obligation to provide meaningful opportunities in that country as well. So I don't think there's as much of a difference anymore between social responsibility and the responsibility you have to your shareholders to create value. I don't think you can create value in today's world without also creating social opportunities. I was at a meeting a couple months ago where I heard the CEO of Microsoft speak. And it was very impressive because he said that he thinks that in today's world, the expectation of countries is that companies will create meaningful employment opportunities within those countries as the license to do business in those countries. And it may not always be that simple, and it may not always be that direct, but I think the connection between the two is stronger right now than it's ever been. And if you listen to every country, everybody's got a little bit of protectionism in them. Everybody's got a little bit of local content requirement in them. And I think what you're hearing is that people expect companies like GE to be invested in the countries where they're doing business.
Do you sense that Trump's behavior is creating barriers to economic, to companies, American companies, while dealing in other countries? The standards that Trump administration is setting may create difficulties to American companies?
They could. We haven't seen any of it yet, because first of all, I think that the truth is that it's been talk and no action out of the United States so far, so there really haven't been any new standards or new policies that have been put into place. So as of this point, we don't see any issue, and again, I think we've been very quick to reassure our customers and our employees and our suppliers and everyone else outside of the United States that we remain as committed as ever to doing business outside of the United States. We announced huge new deals in Saudi Arabia last weekend. We continue to have success outside of the United States, so we're not seeing it, but we're sensitive to the possibility. And that's why we have strong government affairs teams in every country who are telling leaders in each country what our plans are, what we're doing, how we're staying true to our plans, how we're staying true to the strategy that we've had for years. The risk is that if the Trump administration puts policies into place that start trade wars, that could affect GE, and it could affect other companies too. And actually, we hope that's why he won't. But there is definitely a possibility that if the United States starts taking retaliatory measures on trade, that other companies will retaliate. And the unfortunate thing is everybody loses in those circumstances, so I hope it doesn't happen.
So we only have time for one more question.
Okay.
And then that's the last question.
Okay.
A part of your speech that really got me was when you said about not being afraid of taking risks. And you also told us that you began working for the government, and then you made a transition and started working at GE with energy. And I'm assuming you didn't have much expertise when it comes to energy and working in a private company. So how did that feel, that transition? Because I'm putting myself in that situation, and I'm thinking that it was quite a risk, I'd say.
So it was a risk, but I had self-confidence that with hard work and a little determination, I'd be able to learn the business pretty quickly. When I was at my law firm, I learned a whole bunch of different industries, because to represent companies in cases, I needed to be able to understand their businesses, I needed to understand their business models, I needed to be able to understand the transactions. So I actually learned quite a bit as a lawyer about a whole bunch of different businesses while I was working on their problems, which is what, if you guys go into private practice or government practice, you'll learn a lot about the industries too, because in order to help address the problems that have been raised within an industry, you have to understand the industry. So I became a pretty quick study. So when I came to GE, I was fairly confident that I'd be able to catch up pretty quickly. Now, I've been blessed with experts who are very patient with me from time to time, and who will explain concepts to me, how equipment works, what the risks are, what the challenges are. I've had people teach me financial statements, you know, in painful detail. And you have to go to the right kind of place that welcomes an opportunity for people to learn and get the training that they have to get to do their jobs well. So to me, it was a little bit of a risk, but I was pretty comfortable with that part of it because I had self-confidence that with hard work I'd be able to get there. And I'm sure you guys can too.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much. It was a wonderful opportunity for all of us. I would like to excuse there are some people that left. I don't know if they were leaving to classes or to become engineers and etc. But I guess many of them have classes now. So just want to ask you to excuse them that they left. Well, it was great. I think one of the things that reaffirmed my passion for law is the capacity, the autonomy that we acquire by being lawyers, of interfering in several areas of interest of our other passions. People do not have one passion in life. And law is promiscuous in this sense because you can go for your other passions through law. And that's what I learned from you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.